Well, thanks. It's really great to be with you all. As mentioned, I'm from an organization called AVAC that really is, I think, probably a bit different from many of the groups represented here, and we're an advocacy organization, so obviously this is a really critical time, I think, for advocacy. And I think just to echo the first speaker, that I think at a time when science and innovation and global health are under such threat, it's nice to sort of be in a room with a bunch of smart people who are doing really important work, and just remind ourselves that that kind of despite these circumstances, we forge ahead. And that's what AVAC is really meant to do. And that's what I'm going to talk about in this presentation. So it's a little bit of a two-pronged presentation, really to kind of look at the impact of sort of the current U.S. government, U.S. administration, I guess we could say shifts in policy, and the PEPFAR stop work orders and their impact on current PrEP programming, as well as kind of implications for LAAI rollout, which obviously, as has been discussed multiple times, is really kind of the big exciting thing that we're looking at right now. So. This graphic has already been shown, so I will just sort of build on what's already been said. These are again, the UNAIDS targets. I think coming into 2025, we already knew that we were going to be off target from the target of 500,000 new infections. But what I really want to emphasize here is, again, kind of, I think, this sort of critical moment that we found ourselves in coming into 2025 and looking at further scale up of injectable prevention in cabotegravir, and looking at the sort of the promise and the kind of the fast tracking of lenacapavir, as well as some of these other products, continued oral PrEP, as well as the dapivirine ring. And I think just building on this sort of theme of needing options, I think, to ultimately get to the end of HIV. Something, again, I think we're very familiar with. Hugh talked about this, but just a couple of things I really want to emphasize here around looking at sort of the timeline of PrEP initiations from over the past 10 years or so. We all know that with oral PrEP, especially, it took a long time to kind of to get to scale. And just in the past several years, we've really seen those numbers of PrEP initiations begin to grow. Again, coming into 2025, a lot of excitement about the sort of promise of injectables and really seeing these numbers move up. But another thing to really note here in this graphic is the orange in those bars, and that represents the number of PrEP initiations that are PEPFAR supported. And so obviously, I think with the dismantling of PEPFAR, we're all thinking about the implications that this is really going to have on the HIV response broadly, but especially prevention and injectable prevention. So that was going up until 2025, or up and through 2024, and now 2025 hit us, and what happened? And I'm not going to walk through this painful timeline because I think we all know it, we all have lived it. But there are a couple of things that I do really want to point out here in terms of thinking about prevention and thinking about injectable PrEP. And what you see there in at the kind of the February 1st time point, when some of these, and it's all a little confusing in terms of what we hear, what we hear coming from the State Department, what we know is truly happening on the ground. But this sort of issue of the lifting or providing the waiver for PEPFAR, and we do know that a waiver has been provided, and there is a focus on provision of life-saving interventions, which obviously is the primary focus there is on treatment. But they did apply the waiver to prevention for vertical transmission. But that is all PEPFAR is, policy-wise allowed to deliver at this point. So, okay, and I can actually see it much more clearly here. So again, there's a lot of focus from a lot of different groups around the impact that sort of dismantling of PEPFAR is going to have in terms of the HIV response. And these are just a few bullets of some, analyses by UNAIDS, modeling consortiums, and AMFAR, and another effort called PEPFAR Watch. But obviously, if PEPFAR is dismantled, which it basically is happening, with those sort of small caveats, we're going to see this sort of 400% increase in AIDS deaths, incidence among adults could triple. But I think this last bullet is really important to note, especially given, again, messaging we're hearing coming out of the State Department. But what we do know is that 84% of PEPFAR implementing partners are reporting disruptions to their programs. Again, just sort of a few data points around the dismantling of PEPFAR and how that's playing out. We know 2.5 sort of new PrEP users have lost access to PrEP. So the 3.5 million key populations have lost access to prevention services. And this last sort of graphic or icon is important to note, I think, especially for the focus of this meeting. But PEPFAR's goal through 2025 was to get 100,000 people on injectable cabotegravir. And what we see now in our current state is that only 5,000 people have been initiated. So obviously we are way behind and not getting any closer to that goal. And I'm not going to go through all of this information, but I think the point here is that when we're looking at prevention, sort of PrEP broadly, PrEP delivery is being impacted, but the impacts are really wide-ranging, and are really kind of impacting critical aspects of the HIV response. So obviously key populations are being sort of targeted or kind of left out of the response. We all know, and Hugh talked about this. This is when they're some of the hardest to reach populations as it is, and now they're going to be even harder to reach. And so a lot of these sort of impacts are just going to continue to sort of set us back in terms of prevention, programming, and the broader response. These are a few numbers going back to sort of what I said about the goal of putting 100,000 people on cabotegravir through the PEPFAR program, and what you see. I can't see these numbers so clearly anywhere from here, but you see some of the numbers that were projected for various countries, and then kind of current status, and obviously most of them have either been stopped or are kind of partially disrupted. So now what? And this is a little bit of a segue into kind of what is what the world is thinking now in terms of the introduction of lenacapavir and sort of the promise there. What do we need to do to sort of build on this, to not squander this opportunity that we do have with lenacapavir, and just a lot of different bullets that I think are relatively obvious. And one thing I think that's really important to focus on is this commitment by the Global Fund and PEPFAR, an announcement that was made in December of last year, around really operationalizing lenacapavir introduction. And I'm going to talk in more detail about that as I transition. So timing matters, obviously, and we are in a very precarious time. So this is a really busy slide with lots of information, but builds on kind of the pipeline presentations that you've already heard about. But this is sort of AVAC's, our sort of infographic that we use to represent the pipeline of products that are really sort of in latest stages, moving from research to rollout, and some of the sort of critical pieces. And you see in those red circles, I think some of the reasons that we have been so excited about 2025 and things that are sort of set to happen this year. First of all, the annual price of cabotegravir is meant to go down to $160 per person per year. Again, as has been mentioned, we're looking at regulatory approvals for lenacapavir, as well as the dual purpose prevention pill. So the first the first biomedical dual-purpose product to prevent both HIV and pregnancy. And then finally, looking at the initiation of the phase 3 program for the monthly MK8527 oral pill by Merck, which also has been discussed. So just to say, it's an exciting time, which makes, I think, the sort of the challenges all the more real and all the more challenging. This is a graphic we like to use to kind of show the amount of time that it's taken for these sort of various interventions to achieve some critical milestones on the path from research to rollout. I think the key message here is that, as we all know, it took a long time for all of these milestones to happen with oral PrEP. And especially, as kind of cabotegravir came on the scene, and then looking towards lenacapavir, there's been a huge push to speed up the process, right? And a lot of lessons have been learned now with cabotegravir, and achieving certain milestones and bringing kind of key players together, getting commitments, getting negotiations, and all of that work is really being built on to, as you see, to continue to fast track with lenacapavir, because everyone really sees this as, not necessarily a miracle drug, but really a game changer for HIV. But, given, I think, the breakdown, especially with PEPFAR, there are now even more question marks around those pieces than ever. So one of the kind of mechanisms that's been put into place is this coalition to accelerate access to long-acting PrEP. It's kind of a mouthful, I just call it the coalition. But this is an effort that has been made by AVAC with a number of conveners that you see listed there to, again, to sort of bring these key players together to negotiate around some of these sort of, key milestones that need to happen, again, to sort of fast track the introduction. And I think overcome especially the challenges of getting these new next generation innovative products, especially something like an injectable, to scale and to global access. And so when we think about lenacapavir, you can't just sort of snap your fingers and say, let's do it faster, right? It's hugely complex, and this is a lot of work that is being done by the long-acting coalition to get to scale as quickly as possible. You see here, and I'm definitely not going to go through all of the detail on this slide, but there are lots of resources if you want to kind of dig into that on your own. But what you see here is really a process that's being laid out around generic manufacturing and getting lenacapavir, especially to low and middle income countries. I do want to note, Gilead has not announced a price yet, but as I mentioned on that sort of pipeline slide, injectable CAB is now at $160 per person per year. So we anticipate that Gilead will come in, somewhere around there, but we're really hoping for lower. And I think that there's a lot of thinking that they will come in around $100 per person per year, which really provides a lot of potential for getting this product to scale. And then ultimately, obviously, looking at generic manufacturing and bringing that price even lower. A lot of people feel that these injectables need to be the same price as oral PrEP, which is $40 per person per year. And then this is sort of a big kind of crux of the matter right now. I mentioned this earlier, but last December, the Global Fund and PEPFAR did announce this coordinated effort to reach 2 million people with lenacapavir for PrEP. And so, obviously, this is a huge goal, and it required a lot of coordinated effort from from the coalition that I described to really get everybody around the table and get these commitments, I think both from the Global Fund and PEPFAR, but also from Gilead, who importantly has made some significant commitments around volume provision and manufacturing. I think I just really want to kind of say, PEPFAR is still in the game. They're still part of the coalition. They're not completely gone, and they're still a part of this, but they're operating at much less capacity. So there's really kind of a shift in thinking about where does the Global Fund come in, and what we're seeing sort of play out now is the Global Fund kind of, coming in and still committing to this. And what we know is that they did just receive an initial replenishment from CIF, the Children's Investment Foundation Fund, for $50 million specifically for LAAI. And I'm almost done. This is kind of a similar timeline, right? Like all these pieces are coming together, regulatory approvals, volume, manufacturing, but now there is a big question mark with this kind of funding freezes and this just the dismantling of the PEPFAR infrastructure around if this is possible. So I think as Richard mentioned, this is really gonna take a lot of, everybody really working together. This is just some tracking that is, more tracking that is done by that long-acting coalition to kind of look at sort of key pathways and key stakeholders to make sure that this sort of, the path to lenacapavir rollout is being maintained. And then also just to note, big issue is around generic manufacturing, and what this is kind of a bit of a hard to interpret graphic, but what this shows is that if you look at generic manufacturing of both cab and LAAI, we may see those generics available both in kind of 2027, 2028. And then finally, I think that's sort of a segue into I think something that has been mentioned in this conversation around choice, and I think it's really important as we're thinking about all of these injectables, is kind of an innovation pileup. And at AVAC, we're really sort of tracking, obviously, the kind of the development of these new products and thinking about, cabotegravir going from a 2-month to a 4-month injection, lenacapavir from 6-month to 12-month. How many injectables can the prevention market bear? Nobody really knows that yet. And it's, I think an even more important question to answer, because we're going to have a lot less luxury when it comes to all of this. And then importantly, as has been mentioned, there is development. The efficacy program is just going to be launching this year of the monthly pill. And it's really important to think about how that can kind of come in and sort of fill a gap that injectables don't fill. And my last 2 slides are really just this years for the lenacapavir PrEP rollout. We'll give you all that detail that I went through very quickly in some very busy slides, and just more resources that are available to learn more about all of this. And I think that is my last slide. Thank you.